What's your I didn't believe in ghosts until paranormal story? Story 1. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago after a long fight with cancer, about a month before my wedding. I saw her the day before she passed, but due to work I wasn't at the hospital the day of, and was pretty upset about it. After her funeral I dreamt I was at my parents' house, but in the dream it was my friend's house. He was saying to me there are lots of ghosts in the house, and at that point there's a knock at the door. There's a lead light window by the door, and I see an outline of a small lady in a purple wool coat, something my grandmother wore before she was admitted to the hospital. I walk to the door and open it to see her standing there. I ask her how she is, and I unlock the door, and then I wake up. At this point, I'm completely shaken. I get up to get some water and just process what I dreamt. After about 20 minutes, I go back to bed, and eventually, after about an hour, fall asleep, and begin dreaming from that exact point before I woke up, where I unlock the door and see her standing there, holding a plate of my favorite food that she would always make whenever I or she visited. I hug her and ask her how she is, and she says she's fine, and not to be sad because everything is going to be okay. I tell her that I love her and miss her, give her one last hug, and then I wake up. Story 2. Oh man, my time to shine. So I used to rent a townhouse in the woods with my ex. One night I'm out on duty when she calls me at about 3 in the morning, absolutely hysterical. I'm thinking, oh my god, somebody broke in. I gotta race home and help, but it seems the wooden baby gate we used to keep the puppy downstairs flew from the base of the stairs all the way up the stairs, hit the ceiling leaving a mark, and landed in a mangled mess. The puppy was locked in her cage all night, so she couldn't have done it. And all those doors and windows were locked from the inside. Later that month, we were in the kitchen having a chat when, in front of our eyes, this big heavy feeder we used for the cat, which was on the countertop as I'd just cleaned it, rotated 90 degrees upright onto its side, and then gently another 90 so as to be upside down. It barely made a tap as it landed. The feeder was heavy. When I tried to recreate this, it made a very loud crash. How could it rotate with only a tap? More crazy things happened too. I would enter the kitchen and then the silverware drawer would bang super loud. The animals would stare at a corner of the room and slowly back away. A dead-bolted door would be wide open as soon as you turned your back to it. Oh, and the nightmares. Man, you would not believe. So, not saying I believe in ghosts, but damn bud, sounds evil as fuck, especially if it was affecting your dreams. Story 3. Years ago, my husband and I were trying to see if we could get a modest house by contract for deed. We took my sister along to look at the house. It still had someone's personal effects in it, as though they had just stepped out, but was for sale. We walked all through and were hopeful. Suddenly, my sister said, "Wait, I know whose house this was. This house belonged to that guy my son knew who died in his kitchen. This was Tony's house." At that precise moment, a cabinet door shot open and whacked her on the backside. Never one to be rattled easily, she looked up and said, "Okay, Tony, we get it." We checked it. It was indeed his house. The cabinet had been tightly shut, and the floor was stable. I've never seen a cabinet door randomly swing open with a force behind it like that. Not enough to hurt, but fast, as though a hand had whipped it open. You had to be there. I wish we could have gotten the house even if he was haunting it. He was known to be a nice guy, very funny, and we wouldn't have minded sharing it with him. Story 4. When I was in college, I lived in an apartment complex. Every once in a while, at like 2 in the morning, I would hear breaking glass. It was clear as day when it happened. There was no doubt it was a window breaking. Never found any broken glass anywhere around the apartment. My younger brother would come out and party with us, and once or twice he came busting into my room, thinking someone was breaking in. Finally, one night, my girlfriend stayed over. She would kick and push in her sleep, and at some point nudged me and I woke up. When I looked over at her, she wasn't asleep. She was sitting at the foot of the bed, facing away from me. When I said her name, she stood up and walked out of the room. Glass break. I looked around and realized that she was still laying next to me in bed. That was the only time I saw anything in that place, but heard the sounds pretty consistently. Story 5. My mom and dad passed just 5 weeks apart, of unrelated cancers. We had taken my son with us to my parents' house to feed their cats, which we would go on to adopt. My son was 7 at the time. He wandered downstairs to explore. At some point reappeared upstairs, strangely subdued. Now at that time he hadn't yet learned to lie, nor did he make stuff up. My wife noticed his demeanor and asked, "What's up, kid?" Pop is outside by the fence. "I want to go home now." Story 6. It's pretty fucking stupid. The TV would randomly turn on and switch to the news. I'd turn it off and it automatically turned back on after like half a minute and go to the news. I'd switch it on to Dr. Phil or Judge Judy or something, and it'd switch back to the news. This happened every night around 20 to 21 for about a month. 5 years later, and I still think a ghost was looking for a place to live. Story 7. I work in a hotel that was built in 1885, so I have plenty of stories. But one that still gives me goosebumps would be the time I was vacuuming. It had randomly stopped while I was halfway through cleaning the room. I thought the plug had fallen out of the socket, so I went to plug it back in, but it was in fine. So I checked the vacuum itself and it was switched off there, but it had been right behind me the whole time. I switched it back on thinking I had just bumped the switch with the hose, but after a few seconds it turned back off again. I went back and forth fighting with whatever spirit was in there to keep it on, but after about 3 or 4 times, I gave up and left the room. And went on to the next one where it worked fine and continued to work well for the remainder of the cleans. Whoever was in there obviously thought it was funny to play jokes, as I never felt afraid while in there. And for anyone wondering, I did manage to make it back in there and finish cleaning before more guests arrived. Story 8. Babysitting my niece when she was 2 years old. The place was a very old house my sister was renting, built in the 1930s. I'm alone in the place with her while my sister is working overnight. It's about 11 p.m., and she's been asleep for a couple of hours at this point. I'm watching TV in the living room and seeing her running down the dark hallway. Stops just before the entryway to the living room, and I jokingly said, "You better go back to bed or I'm gonna get you," and got up to get her back in bed. I always turn the hallway's light on, and her bedroom door is still closed. Weird. So I open it to find my niece completely passed out on her bed, drooling and everything. It wasn't my niece I saw in the hallway, so I took her to sleep with me that night. The ghost/home invader must have been confused as fuck. Never got this reaction before. Better get back to bed. Story 9. When I was around 6 or 7, I was trying to fall asleep this one night, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't. So I decided to look around for a brief moment when I saw this white blob-like figure outside of the bedroom's door. It was partially open since I have a cat. The next day, about 6 p.m., I was walking home from the playground with my dad when I got a call announcing my grandma had passed. Since that day, I would continue to see that white figure along with a new one occasionally, a silhouette of a woman in a dress, but with no head. Story 10. When I was 10, me, my mom, and my twin brother were driving in the car. When we were on the main road, the car turned off. The only thing left on was the radio. The radio was playing my uncle's favorite song. He's been dead for almost 8 years now. The car would not turn back on until the song finished. Still a good song though. Story 11. We were taking a tour of the Battleship, Massachusetts, in Falls River for my girlfriend's 30th birthday. She wanted to do scary stuff and I wanted to see museums, so we stayed in the Lizzie Borden house and the next night at the Shanley Hotel. I didn't personally feel any definitive paranormal activity at each location, but there was definitely signs. The one place I actually wanted to go wasn't meant to have any paranormal activity, was just the ship. While we were touring the bathroom/cafeteria area, I was snooping around the shower, just curious, when I got tapped on the shoulder. Thinking it was my girlfriend, I turned around and no one was there. She was a few rooms away and we were the only 2 people in the area. Nothing was hanging above me or leaking. The area was a little cool, and it just felt like if a human touched my shoulder, and I am 100% certain it happened. I found it ironic considering the other places we had been were known for their ghost activity. Story 12. Saw a doppelganger. 2018, my father had passed and I was staying with my mom. 3 days after the funeral, I heard my father's cane come down the hall and stop at my door. Then the next day, getting ready to leave, and I passed my mom in the bathroom getting ready to go. I tell her, "I'm ready when you are and I'll be outside." She said okay. I get to the front door and my actual mom is standing on the porch. That freaked me out so bad. 3 people had died in that house over the last 10 years. Always spooked me. Story 13. Was babysitting my parents' friend's child. They were out for dinner and someone had to take care of the baby and I volunteered. I was about 11 or 12 at the time and wasn't that close to the baby. The house they lived in was very old, but had just been refurbished to look nicer. It was around 7:30 when I put the baby to bed, then I was just chilling on the couch for an hour before I heard something. It sounded like floorboards creaking. It was around 8:30 now, but since the baby was no taller than a foot, it couldn't have been her. It was a single-family house, and the nearest neighbors were about 10 yards away. Nobody was home except me and the baby. I went upstairs to make sure the baby was okay, but she was sitting up in her crate, just staring down the hallway through a separate door that was slightly creaked open. I went over to see what she was looking at. I opened the door all the way and a cold wind swept my ankles. No windows open and no ventilation in this hall, and what seemed like a figure's shadow creeped into the other room. I grabbed the baby, went straight downstairs, and locked her and I in a small reading room until around 12 p.m. when the parents got home. Never babysitting in a house from 1920 again. Story 14. When I took a shower at 7 a.m. when my 2 roommates were sleeping, there was a very distinct knock at the door as soon as I turned the shower off. I didn't respond because I figured the shower turning off was enough of an indicator. I was ready to leave the bathroom and heard another knock on the door and quickly opened the door to let them know it was done and no one was there. I was in my bedroom getting ready 10 minutes later and there was a knock on the door, and then it just opened, slowly. My roommates' doors hadn't opened, nor had they been awake. Story 15. My parents told me someone had died in our house before we moved in. Apparently they were very old and had passed away in their room. There were several weird instances where I was spooked in the middle of the night, or I would get creepy vibes, like I wasn't alone in my room sometimes. The freakiest thing that happened still creeps me out. Our family dog used to sleep with me sometimes, and she would hop up into my bed during the night. One night, I was already kind of half asleep when I felt the pressure on the mattress at the edge of my bed near my feet. If you can imagine someone sitting at the edge of your bed, it felt exactly like that. Rationally, I thought it might be my dog making herself comfy because she wanted to sleep with me tonight. My heart practically stopped when I sat up to give her a little pet and discovered that there was nothing there. Story 16. I used to see 2 black shadows when I was a kid. Saw them multiple times and would always run into my parents' room and sleep next to my mom. Scared the crap out of me. I used to see shadows at the edge of my vision. Was almost convinced my kit home rental was haunted. Turned out I had a hole in my retina and was at risk of going blind. It was expensive to fix, but probably cheaper than hiring the Ghostbusters. Story 17. I'd never believed in spirits/ghosts, even though I live by a graveyard. One day I was helping my dad do yard work with my sister at my dead grandma's house, who passed away about 5 years ago in 2016. We got bored, so we asked our dad if we could go play in the path by the railroad tracks right beside the graveyard. Our dad said yes, and when we were halfway down the path, we needed clippers and my sister left them. She turned back and went to go grab them. I kept going when she was gone, and while I was walking, I saw something running toward me. And it wasn't an animal. It looked like it had a white shirt. I hesitated for a second and ran as fast as I possibly could, screaming for my life. I looked back while I was running and saw nothing. I told my sister and my dad, but they didn't believe me. We went back down the path. I smelled something dead. We found nothing, but it still to this day smells like a dead human, and it still scares me to this day. Story 18. I was going to high school in the Philippines. The school is also a university. It is rumored to be haunted because it was turned into a triage hospital for a time during World War II. I was going up the stairs to go to the music room to rehearse. I could hear someone playing piano in the music room. As soon as I go to open the door to the music room, I find it locked and the piano music stops. That's when I got freaked out. There was nobody in the music room. I know this because 1, the door is padlocked from the outside, and 2, because it's just padlocked, I can actually open the door a crack, and it faces directly at the piano, and I could see there was no one there. I ran away and forgot about that for a long time. Story 19. Seeing a man in my bedroom. I was 15 or 16 at the time. I have always had a good imagination, so thought I was making it up. I saw him a few times, but never thought anything of it. Fast forward a few months and I'm talking to my, now ex, stepdad about various things, and he explains that he's seen a man in the house, near my bedroom, then describes him exactly as I've been seeing him. Spooky. He never felt dangerous, but after that I always said hi and was polite. Story 20. I was home alone while FaceTiming some random girl I had added on Tinder that night, roughly 4 a.m. I'm sitting on my beanbag in the living room with a fake fireplace on the TV, drinking a Dr. Pepper. Everything's great. We're hitting it off, and I finished my soda, so I set down the can. Within 5 seconds of putting that empty can on the ground, it starts to spin in place violently, but it's standing upright the whole time, and then slides halfway across the living room floor. A good 10 feet of sliding while spinning and somehow managing not to fall over. Tried to recreate it since then, but no luck. Tinder girl ended up thinking I was trying to mess with her or something because I started flipping out. Oh well, maybe the Dr. Pepper ghost knew something I didn't about the girl. Story 21. So I was like 11 and I was walking through my great-grandmother's house that my grandma was remodeling so her and my pawpaw could move into that house, and I see a man sitting there in the living room chair that hadn't been moved yet, holding a cup of coffee and a TV remote. Later, I figured out how my pawpaw Jay died, holding a cup of coffee and the remote, like he'd fallen asleep watching Family Feud and never woke up. Story 22. I was babysitting a friend's baby 3 years ago, and it was around 3 months old. They went on a date night while I stayed and made sure the baby didn't die, I guess. Around 2 a.m. I checked the baby monitor and to my horror saw a hand in the crib. I knew I was home alone and it was a small house anyway. I grabbed a baseball bat from the shed and ran in there and turned the light on. Nothing there, but I made the baby cry. I know I saw something. I wasn't even tired or high or anything. I couldn't sleep knowing that I saw something there. I took the baby and put it in the same bed as me and slept. He started getting very fussy whenever I tried putting him back in the crib. At 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep and looked at the baby monitor and saw 2 hands now on the crib. I'm not taking the piss right now. I swear I saw one of the hands had their finger up. I told the parents and they thought I was just tired. You went out to the shed for a bat and left the baby alone in the house with a disembodied hand. Yeah, what the fuck? Everybody knows that you're supposed to slap a disembodied hand. That's like a drop kick to the chest for them. Our education system is so broken.